Good afternoon to all of you, and welcome to this session on exponential technologies for a better world. So we have a very distinguished panel here, and without wasting much time, because we have a lot of perspectives and the opportunity to learn from a lot of experience and expertise. So let me first request each of our panelists to give a brief introduction of themselves, not more than 1 minute because of the paucity of time. So let's start with Sudhir.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sudhir Pai. I'm Chief Technology and Innovation Officer for Financial Services, Global Business at Capgemini. Capgemini is a global consulting firm with about 200,000 people worldwide and about 13 billion euro business. So my focus is new and next horizons of technology and applicability of technology to innovate new propositions. Less than a minute.
Thanks.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Peng. I work for Malaysia Digital Economy Corporation. What we do is we help to drive and lead the digital transformation in the country. And currently focusing on driving the adoption of digital technology so that we can bring more benefit and drive the digital economy forward in the country.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shailesh. I'm a partner at TPG. I run our growth fund and our social impact fund called the RISE Fund for India and Southeast Asia. And in a prior life, spent 20 years in technology across Google, Twitter, and started my career in FinTech.
Hi, my name is Anthony Bartolo. I work for Tata Communications. I'm the Chief Product Officer there. Tata Communications is a service provider to a service provider. We basically are a global telecom operator. We carry some 30% of the world's internet routes, connect 4 out of 5 mobile phone calls around the world. I have 710,000 kilometers of terrestrial and subsea cable that connect all telecom operators with each other, as well as enable a lot of the cloud operators around the world today.
Hi, good afternoon, folks. My name is Raman Roy, and for all my sins, I head a company called Quattro, which comes from the Latin word fourth. It's my fourth startup, and that's one of the many hats that I wear. I'm also a co-founder of Indian Angel Network, which is globally the largest angel network that is headquartered out of India. We have some 500 angels who participate in the startup ecosystem. I'm also very active on the policy side, on the IT. I'm a past chairman of NASSCOM, work actively with the government policy, not only for IT, but also for the startup ecosystem. Look forward to this session.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Angela Carcheska, and the last name is from North Macedonia. And so that's why our headquarters is in China, and I'm stationed in Hong Kong, and we have a startup company in Singapore. So actually, we're keep flying and flying. But I want to introduce our headquarters is Hundsun Technologies. We are listed in Shanghai Stock Exchange, and we the only one service provider who provided all the license solution to all the Chinese brokerage firm, bank, exchange. And we focus on B2B business. And our major shareholder is Ant Financial. And actually, as we mentioned, Asia Pacific is our startup here. So that's why we are very happy to have an introduction here, and I hope the upcoming panel can have some more information we can learn.
Hello, everyone. My name is Graeme Muller. I'm from NZTech in New Zealand. It's a not-for-profit NGO. It's the NASSCOM of New Zealand, I guess. We have connected up all the different tech associations, including FinTech, into one big ecosystem to support the growth of tech in New Zealand, which is going gangbusters. It's now become our third largest export. And one of the things a lot of the tech companies coming out of New Zealand are doing is focusing on what we call being good for the world. If we're going to do some stuff, let's try and make sure we do it for a purpose and do it for an impact.
So my name is Anand Deshpande. I'm the founder, chairman of Persistent Systems, a company that I started 29 years back. So I've been doing the same thing for the last 29 years. We are about 10,000 people company in 20 countries, and we are listed now in India for the last 10 years. Beyond Persistent, where I'm responsible for technology and other related things, I'm involved in a non-profit called the Astra Foundation, where we are focused a lot on creating employment or self-employed people at scale at the services industry, mainly urban services jobs. And then I'm also on the board of the UID Authority of India, which is where Aadhaar and other activities are going on. So thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
Thank you very much. So before we start, it will be good to get a sense of the audience, so that when the panelists are making their, sharing their experiences and perspectives, it's more aligned to what might be of interest to all of you. So how many of you, by raise of hands, are from government organizations? So I see just 2 hands here. Okay, 3. How many of you are from FinTech companies? FinTech. Okay, quite a few. And how many of you are from technology companies? Okay. And in the audience, how many are startups? Just starting up their businesses. I see. Okay, very good. So we have a good sprinkling of people from government, from the startup world, and I think there are a few students as well, right? So are there people here who are from universities? Or polytechnics?
Or people here who went to university.
No, we have 3 people from polytechnics. Okay, very good. So let us try to frame today's discussion in the context of where we are now, what is new, and what is next. So we get a perspective of how disruptive technologies can have huge impact in the context of taking an assessment now, new, and next. So let me pose this question to our panelists, that how do they see the current status of disruptive technologies being used in FinTech? So may I start with you, Anand? If you can share your experience, especially given your background with UIDAI.
Right, so in the market right now, if you look at the companies that we work as Persistent, the main challenges we see are around data integration, the experience that users are expecting, and finally, in the context of compliance. So those are 3 main areas that we see a lot of action in some sense. In terms of the UID Authority of India, we have slightly different kinds of issues that we deal with. But predominantly, the idea is to see how we can get people at the bottom of the pyramid to get access to funding or funds that are due to them to come to them through direct deposits to their bank account. So that's one of the areas that we are starting to see a lot of action in. And there's a lot of activity from Aadhaar driven on that particular point of view. So I'm going to just stop here and let it flow along and come back.
Okay, sure. Any other perspectives on how do you see?
Maybe just building on.
Sure.
There are a couple of dimensions when it comes to disruptive technologies and how it is being used. So I guess predominantly there is a dimension about how do you anticipate new and next. That means how do you know what is coming next and what is the right bet on these technologies and the timing as well. When is the right bet. So that whole anticipation is a very interesting thing, because sometimes you think quantum as an example, you think it's 20 years or 10 years or 5 years, or when is the right time for you to enter, which is extremely important. The second thing is about differentiation. So tech being tech, it's about creating the value proposition by probably combination of several technologies, right? So One example I can give is we are currently working on a frictionless claim, right, which has many things, which has IoT, which has VIN number through blockchain, and so on and so forth. So tech is tech, but how do you apply tech is the differentiation. And last but not the least, we classify this as operationalizing the technology stack. That means how do you really operationalize, which is about culture of the organization, ways of working, and so on and so forth. So these are probably 2-3 additional dimensions I thought I will highlight.
Yes, please.
If I may add to what was said just now, in Malaysia, when we look at the disruptive technology, we all know that disruptive today will become mainstream tomorrow. So the important thing is how you use technology to benefit the people. So since we are talking about FinTech here, so we use a term in Malaysia, we call it sleep, the saving, the lending, investment, and what's the last one? Payment. And in just like any society, payment will always be the one that most people will do first because that is going to impact most people. And being a solution provider, or if, let's say you're a financial institution, you want to go to those that you can spread the usage. And from there, you can gather enough information, enough data. That's when disruptive technology come in, data analytics come in, AI comes in, and you can use those information that you gather and start providing some other services that require a lot more, maybe process, like lending. Because payment is easy. I take money, so I do not have to check too much about who you are to pay me money. But if I have to give you money, I need to know more about you. So that's when payment can lead to the investment side of it, and can lead to other part. So I think that's how we look at FinTech, and it will begin with those low-hanging fruit, but eventually we see that FinTech is being used to go to very specific verticals. Eventually, people will be looking at giving a specific solution, like let's say in transportation, and then that's when the future will go.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think as someone who was in the FinTech space in 99 to 2005, most financial institutions at that time simply thought about how do I get online? How do I just replicate what I do offline and be available online? And there was some good innovation at the time, but the populations you were dealing with were very small, and they tended to be very advanced. Today, we're in a very different environment. The stakes are much higher, largely because of mobility and more comfort with the internet and digital technologies, where we're now in an environment with massive connected mobile scale. And in that context, we're seeing tremendous creation and a wide variety of offerings on wealth management side, insurance, lending, core banking, variety of things. But I think we're still sort of waiting for these startups to prove it. Prove that they're viable at scale with proper risk management and compliance. There's a heavy operations component to financial services with which other sectors of technology don't necessarily have to deal with. And I think that blue-collar operational component, everyone's waiting for companies to prove they can handle that part of the business at scale, which is not very sexy, but is a minimum requirement to be successful. The piece that I think I don't see enough people talking about, which I'm interested to hear people's solutions to, are not on the supply side. We all talk about pushing product out. We don't talk enough about financial literacy and the absorption capability of the users. You can throw 15 transformational offerings at people, but if they still don't use a core banking account, how are they going to be able to process a revolving working capital loan on a virtual card or other kinds of sort of exotic offerings? So I think where we are today is tremendous creativity, largely unproven, and the absorption, demand side, financial literacy question largely going unaddressed.
I think quickly on that topic, I mean, there's some interesting statistics. So I believe there are 1.7 billion people around the world who don't have a bank account, you know, to your point on financial literacy. And I think there's a bridge to thinking about disruptive technologies. And the humble mobile phone, in a way, to those individuals, is a disruptive technology, because 1.1 billion of that 1.7 billion actually have a mobile phone. So that's the avenue to that particular community. If we can just get some of the FinTech, first get some of the literacy up, and then get some of the applications to be relevant to that particular community. And I think there's a lot of different disruptive technologies that start to really open up the Pandora's box. Once you get that literacy, you start to think about, well, what about insurance is a concept that they would never have thought about. Micro-insurance, IoT capabilities, because IoT provides light where there was darkness, right? It provides insight where you once had no visibility into either that individual, that behavior, or how their little small businesses run. And introducing some of that technology starts to open up some of these derivative FinTech opportunities, like I mentioned, insurance, actuarial services, whether it's from the cloud or otherwise. And I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. But they need to be connected. Like, from my perspective, I want all devices and all things born connected. And when they're born connected, then all of a sudden, as they grow through their infancy and through maturity, then you'll see some of the usage certainly increase and be valued at that within those communities.
I just wanted to build on a couple of concepts that were spoken about. Innovation to mainstream, you spoke about that. You spoke about the education aspects of people and actually the mortality rate of some of these companies, because they don't really make it. I think in the new world, there is an aspect, we keep talking of what product is there, how it will be taken, what will happen. But there needs to be an understanding that there is a mortality for the companies if you do not scale up to the level that you are required to. Because, you know, at the end of the day, none of the companies in FinTech that I'm aware of are registered as a charitable society. They're all registered as companies for profit. And ultimately, they have to make a profit. And that aspect, to say that which way it will turn from charity, if you'll excuse my use of the term, where they are eating all the expenses, where they are giving away more than what they are making on a transaction, into a sustainable business, the challenge for the future is going to be around that. And the challenge in understanding that the concept, this is not about mortality of a company. This is about the mortality of that concept that a company may be doing, which brings out the need to pivot and bring out new aspects given the changing circumstances. And I think as I look into the future, as I look into the crystal ball, that aspect of pivoting, that aspect of modifying, that aspect of changing is going to play a big role. And in that, the founders will have a role to play, the investors will have a role to play, and the customers will have a role to play.
Yes. Actually, for mention about the innovation, I think it's not just because, oh, I believe FinTech, this works, and this innovation I need to do. But I think that for the initial starting point, that is, we want to do something new that can help the client or help ourselves to solve some problem. Not just like a religious, oh, I believe blockchain is okay, that everything is applied in blockchain. So that's why I thinking I very agree that sometimes we work with some FinTech company or the startup. Everybody will have the dream. But you know, once the dream starting, you need to wake up. So, and of course, at this moment, if we're doing the FinTech, what our professional is we facing for the, we mainly is serving the mainland China brokers in China and Hong Kong. So that's why when we're facing the FinTech this world, actually just for us, we need to thinking, okay, I need to fulfill my clients' daily work, operation, maybe the capital have a few 100 billions is running outside. But at the same time, we need to catch up what's the environment's changing, what's the newcomers, or what my clients are facing their competitors. So that's why when we're doing those technology, let's say AI, bot train, or red tech, all these kind of things, we at the same time we need to handle the normal operation, the old generation system, very big, huge system. At the same time, we need to how to help them to smoothly to transit to our new technology. So that's why in the past years, we spend a lot of resources, no matter in China or in Hong Kong. We will see. Maybe we cannot running like the FinTech startup so fast, but at the same time, we need to make sure we need to fulfill all our client needs at the same time. Let their business don't stop, and then at the same time, we can have the FinTech, AI, technology, those things. And also nowadays, if thinking for the FinTech, it's not just as a solution provider or a government or a data provider, they can work together. So we have to build the whole ecosystem. They have buy side, sell side, demand, supply. So this is most efficient ways for really running this FinTech ecosystem.
Graeme, do you have anything to add? Anand? Okay. So I think this was a range of perspectives. Now, if we look at the financial sector and the use of technologies, what we are finding is that the bigger players like Facebook getting into Libra, or you have even companies like Grab applying for a digital license, digital banking license. So there are a lot of these super platforms, if you will, which are actually becoming very important. So when we are talking of smaller companies, startups, and especially, Raman, you are supporting a lot of startups, what do you see their future in view of the fact that there are huge players in the market and which are not confined to banking? They are coming from outside of that sort of area.
Yeah,
so
it
what is the future?
The world is changing. And, you know, when I talk to my grandfather, what is happening today, he thinks it's black magic what is happening today. And I think our grandchildren will see, we will see what happens when they are a little older as black magic. But, you know, it is fascinating. The way the world is working. You talk of Grab taking a license in India. WhatsApp is working with the government to get a license to do money transfer on WhatsApp. How many in this room use WhatsApp? Oh, a lot. What do you pay for it? You see any ad on it? Is there a revenue model that any one of you is aware of that WhatsApp runs? They got sold for 17 odd billion. 19 billion, sorry. What's 2 billion between friends, right? 19 billion, and their P&L doesn't show a revenue model. The license that they are trying to get from the government of India rides on the UPI rail, and the government has already made a policy statement that for micropayments, which is what WhatsApp wants to make on that platform, there will be zero fee. So their ability to participate in a revenue model is near zero. But they are pursuing it. And, you know, I don't mind having my company sold for, forget 19 billion, 1.9, 10% of that. So there is a new world that is emerging. There is a new methodology. I work, you said, you know, based on my learnings from the companies, I am working with companies whose business model creates traction with the customer, not revenue, but based on that reaction, they have created other alternates, which is, if I put my neck out and say, which is what Facebook did, acquiring WhatsApp, because there is a link that got created, and Facebook has a different revenue model, but this allows Facebook to link to the customer. So there is a new world order emerging. And if we look into the future, we have to be open about which way it is. People like him will cut a check for a lot of those companies. Hopefully, all of them will succeed, but some of them may not make it. And that is the new reality.
You know, I'll just add a comment about these super app ambitions. You haven't seen the quote-unquote super app, let's say in a large market like the US. You have seen it in China. It's fascinating to understand from some of our Chinese friends why they believe Tencent has been successful with that strategy, or Alibaba. But at least from my observation, I think when you look at the super app players in Southeast Asia, I think effectively what they're trying to do is take advantage of what I would call an arbitrage strategy, which is they have this window of time where the Southeast Asian markets are not big enough to warrant enough capital in specialist startups in only FinTech or only healthcare, and the large Western players that have global valuations are slow to come to Southeast Asia because they're fighting in India first, and they're trying to compete in China. And I would say there's about 5 to 7 years where this window of arbitrage exists, where someone like a Gojek or a Grab can accelerate their super app ambitions without too much American competition and without too much large capital coming into specialty players. And whether or not they can win, it'll be an interesting thing to see unfold. I will say, having spent a long time at Google, and I talk to startups and they'd say, you know, I don't know why should I even do this? Google is doing it. And see, what you're not understanding is, it's not Google doing it. If you deconstruct Google, Google is a confederation of subscale startups. Some have the best engineers, some have tier 2 engineers, and some have tier 3 engineers. The tier 1 engineers are on search. I'm not sure the tier 3 engineers are on healthcare. For a long time, they were not on FinTech. Now with the success of payments and Google Pay, they're starting to get tier 1 and tier 2 engineers. But I would say to founders out there, you know, have the confidence to know that these big companies also are subject to the same rules of any other company, which is the allocation of finite resources. And the best resources, money and people, go to the biggest businesses. And the small ones tend not to get as much attention. So that's kind of what I would say about the super app phenomenon. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But I think startups that are really have A-class people and A-class ideas have a chance if they just persist.
I guess I would have probably slightly different view on this. See, we call this as bottoms-up software development. That is, you're having a technology, you're building a user base, and then you're increasing the value of the company, and then someone will buy it. GitHub is an example. Red Hat is several examples. However, I think there is a bigger opportunity because it is in the next wave, which is 62% of world's population is Gen Z and millennial, we call it, right? So there are unresolved issues with these type of WhatsApp or whatever, right? So those issues are about ethics, about bias, about security, about, those things are still not yet resolved. And these companies, we have seen what happens to Facebook, what happens to, technology, what happened to Google, etc., right? So on one side, this is all looking good from a revenue machine perspective. On the other side, one cannot ignore that an opportunity exists for us to explore the areas that are extremely important socially for a better life.
Let me add one thing from the small companies here perspective. I think there are lots of opportunities in going after very specific task-centric processes where the large companies will take their time to get to those kinds of very specialized activities that are relevant for the end user. So if you have a solution that can be really very specific about doing a particular activity, then for a startup, I think that's a good place to play rather than trying to compete with the super apps who have lots of money and existing customers to play with. So if you have a requirement where it's easy to do something because that's really what the customers are looking for in a particular segment, getting that out, getting it simple, getting it easy to use, and then letting the ecosystem play the future is a good place to go rather than worry about some of the large companies who will take their own time to get to that point.
Peng, you had some.
Yeah, actually, I just want to Number one, I think the life of startup is going to be very tough. You are right that there's a lot of competition, big players. But generation after generation, we see new startups that come up. And some of the big players today, they will start up once. And then the cycle is getting shorter. So I believe that there's a lot of opportunities. Just like you talk about 1.7 billion people are still not on board yet. So for startup, it's very simple, right? Look at area that you can make it different and go in and make it different, and that's where you can grow your business and not worried about the big player taking over. I think the big player today, like Google and all, they will have their own inertia now that would make it very difficult for them to move faster than the agile startup can do. The only problem is that a lot of startups, they just want to imitate and then we be very concerned. Then to me, these are not the real startup. These are not the people who's going to innovate. Because if you do believe, many of the new solution is still yet to be developed. And I'm very, very, very confident about that. And government can play a role as well.
Angela, would you like to share your experience with Hundsun?
Yes, actually, for our team or in the Hangzhou, we are a startup in China 25 years ago. But honestly, we are very tough for handling the things every day. But for the startup, we have nothing, so we have nothing lose. So we can try everything. And then
Alibaba, the world's largest payment company, says we are a startup in the rest of the region. Think about it, folks. There's a learning sitting here.
Actually,
Sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah. So actually, our team in Hangzhou or Hong Kong, we get a lot of lessons, very painful lessons. But now we just are facing, after 25 years, we're still very hardworking to working on some new things because the world keeps changing. You cannot stop it. And then you cannot stop the people surrounding how they start up the company, or a lot of big giants, they come out. And this is good. If no competition, how the world will be improved, right? So then everybody very lazy. Okay, I just sleep until next day. So this is not this issue, but the most issue is if we saw those big giants, I think for those new startup and the FinTech, first of all, you need to know very well what you have now on hand. Just practically work properly in doing one thing that you think is good, and then you can solve the problem for the clients. Then step by step, you will build up your reputation, you will build up the team, everything. So I think sometimes everybody's thinking, oh, one day, I admit this, I'll be the big giant. It's impossible. And also for us, at this moment, we still keep learning how to be doing better and learn from each other. So that's why I think for those startup and the FinTech, and also just don't listen what other people saying, oh, this is a success. Because sometimes some people's success in their case not represent you can be success. So that is what I'm thinking.
Very good. Graeme, you wanted to add something?
Oh no, I was actually going to go back to an original point about the scale of the opportunity for this technology to do good. And if you look at that 1.7 billion and just think about the really simple things, and a lot of large organisations might talk about going for those markets, but when you break it down into little niches, into little ways to help, there is an enormous number of opportunities for startups, and you're creating a market. Like it's a little bit like when Uber went into San Francisco and no one wanted an Uber because they had a good taxi system, and then before long, there's a whole new market of people taking Ubers because they increased the whole market. So yeah, looking at that, and it's not just in the of the 1.7 billion that are unbanked, it's even the banked billions who you've got this whole pathway of financial opportunities with them. And if you can move every single person one step along the financial literacy pathway, so I think, yeah, the technology that helps identify those people, helps find them the right opportunities, helps line up those opportunities for them. There's an enormous number of opportunities.
In fact, it's interesting. If you look at the US, which is a developed market, you have these payday loans, and where the interest rate for giving a $500 loan is 400% in the US. And last year in 2018, actually the total number of these loans, they aggregated to something like $90 billion. So I feel that, I agree with many of you that the opportunities are there both in the developing and the developed world. And there's a role for startups as opposed to just the big players dominating the platforms. But coming next to a piece of technology, there's a lot of buzz about 5G technologies. So Anthony, the fact that you come from Tata Communications, what are your perspectives of the impact of 5G on the financial sector?
Well, I think the impact of technology is going to be huge. I mean, one thing, just parking there for a quick second, well, the one thought that kept creeping through my mind, I was listening to the responses, was we often don't talk about a couple of things. One of them is it's a regulated industry. Telecommunications is a regulated industry, and now you've also got a regulated industry in the finance sector. So being successful in one particular country, maybe it's China because the government may have helped or assisted, or in India, the question is how do you get that escape velocity across multiple countries? How can I have a super app that's actually valid right across the world? And I think that's where the regulatory framework is a bit more of a boat anchor. It's a boat anchor in your own country, but I think it's dragging behind you when you try and go across borders. And I think that is probably going to be one of the most difficult and sticky things. If not to just solve that within the entity that you're trying to start up, but also getting finances. I mean, it's one of the biggest questions when I was in the VC world and the PE world. One of the biggest things we looked at was the market regulated? What were the regulations? What are my obligations? Therefore, what markets does it restrict me to? I'm assuming that hasn't changed in your world today. So, and here we are with two industries doing the same thing. I can't do a FinTech. There's nothing we can do on your mobile phones today if the operator did not exist. Simple fact, if you didn't have a mobile phone, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation, to be quite frank, right? We've taken the world to the place where there's a lot of applications that now sit on the cloud that are consumed by your mobile device. So if you didn't have somebody who provided that connectivity, there would be probably a very limited conversation here today, and we'll all be sitting behind a green screen, having a conversation about transferring funds. And I think 5G starts to introduce a very interesting. It sort of raised the table stakes. 5G is something that I think is going to be quite ubiquitous. And what it actually is going to do is, it's not just about the speed. The speed is one thing that's incredibly important, but it's going to wipe out effectively your LAN. So I want you to think about the fact that you've got a wireless LAN at home, that you're connecting your application to that wireless LAN. Your speed that you're getting on that wireless LAN is 25 or maybe 54 megabits per second. Maybe they bond it to 100 meg of speed. Well, the 5G promise is that you're going to get a gig. You're going to get a gig of speed now directly to your mobile device. So it then begs the question, why would you even bother about deploying a wireless LAN? Why would you deploy a wireless LAN in your enterprise? Because I'm going to get this particular speed. So it sort of wipes out the LAN and now provides the operator direct access into your enterprise or direct access into your home. It may have already had that direct access. But you can think about what it now spawns in terms of applications that can be delivered at a much broader speeds, at much faster speeds. And now you can start thinking about these applications more broadly too, because there's going to be that connectivity not just in one country, but in multiple countries. I think that the PEs of the world in future are going to realize, you know what, there really isn't a black art to deploying a mobile network anymore, right? I can deploy a mobile network today from the cloud. I do it today that have started out 4 or 5 companies here in Singapore from a virtual mobile operator. You might think of Red One, you might think of My Republic, you may Red Otter, right? Circles Life. You can start those companies now, mobile operators, in less than 5 months. You can have a conversation to deploying a network in less than 5 months and cost you the price of a subscriber, not cost you the price of building a whole mobile network in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So you can effectively have now a whole mobile network deployed very quickly, and that model can be replicated in every single country just by picking up a license. So a PE can probably wake up and say, you know what, It actually cost me next to nothing to start up a mobile operator. I know that the in-country mobile operators are geographically restricted by their licenses. What if I decided to pick up a license, and they're pretty inexpensive now, in each of these key countries, and now provide an overlay mobile network? I've then created a mobile network of connectivity as a base platform. On top of that, I then build an application. Now that application spans not just that single country I talked about being in one country, but now I can deploy it in multiple countries. I now have the basis of a platform to deploy a FinTech application that may be a bit more than a super app that is valuable in multiple countries. I think that that's a possibility. I don't think I have to wait 2 or 3 years for that. I think that's just an idea that needs to be germinated, can be born and built up. And I then only ask the question of, do the regulations prevent me from really doing that, right? But I've created a platform for others to build their businesses on top. So I think 5G is a huge opportunity and a catalyst, and I think it's not going to be restricted to tier 1 countries either. I think you'll see that much more broadly focused around the world. Emerging markets have always the advantage to some extent because they use technologies to drag them out of a disadvantage, right? So they might deploy 5G, whereas somebody in a developed world would have said, I've already deployed 4G and I want to sweat that asset for as long as I possibly can. I don't want 5G to come along, whereas emerging markets have nothing to lose.
Right.
I think that's an opportunity.
Good.
Let me add a little bit from the FinTech point of view on the 5G changes that might happen. So clearly, financial transactions have all been about making sure that the bank account is continuously balanced. So your cloud and having single transaction systems typically work very well. But when you look at 5G, you're going to see a lot more of edge computing stuff happening. So the distribution of computing is going to be far more distributed than the cloud alone being the place where it goes. So when you have these edge computing devices at various points in your network, I think this whole distributed ledger and how are you going to look at replication of data and how are you going to make the technology happen so that the financial statements are not just at one place with a single transaction system but distributed across the network. It's going to weigh a lot in terms of how you might want to design the next generation system. So there is, I believe, a change in terms of how we look at various transactions that would change in the new 5G world. So there'll be a new set of opportunities that where the old stuff will not work anymore.
Yes, Sudhir.
Yeah, maybe there is a link to 5G or so-called connectivity into some of the other technologies that are evolving as well. Couple of things to add. So there is a trend that we are seeing moving obviously from centralized to distributed. We talk about distributed technologies. I think where it is further heading to is complete decentralization. So decentralization meaning, even to look at internet and internet compute protocol, to use internet as the resources to do the computation, right? So which is pushing the limits beyond the traditional cloud providers. Because at some stage, even cloud, you're limiting yourselves up to cloud. Can you further extend it? So the journey from centralized to distributed will eventually become decentralized. That's one sort of area. The second area we are seeing is, I think, so-called quantum might hit earlier than we are expecting when it really becomes logical quantum or qubits that we talk about. So if you look at the perspective of IoT, distributed ledger, quantum, connectivity, right? So maybe these technology will hit maturity at different point in time, but all these things, putting it in perspective, will create quite a lot of newer opportunities, which probably we haven't even thought about. As an example, the crypto, all the cryptography and public-private keys and whatever today's system, classical system, won't exist the day the quantum will come into play, or we need to think about quantum-based crypto, etc. So I'm trying to push the limit, going back to your point on new and next horizons. So there is, it's not ending here. There's always newer opportunities that we can explore.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that most people sometimes are skeptical about these 3G, 4G, 5G. Is it just, industry speak that doesn't really affect me? But I would ask people to think about 4G largely. I mean, there are a bunch of enterprise implications, but for the average consumer, 4G has basically been equal to video, right? And the prevalence and the mainstreaming of digital video is a result in large part because of 4G. You can talk about the cost of deployment, the time of deployment of these systems. Those are all valid questions. There's still parts of the world that haven't benefited from 4G technologies today. So talking about 5G may be getting ahead of ourselves in terms of an inclusion conversation. But the first point is to say these kind of core technologies matter. And as they kind of percolate and touch the consumer, we see that in a way that we may not connect the dots back to that introduction and deployment, but it's real and it's meaningful. So the question, I think, is relevant. It's material. For those who poo-poo or question the relevance of 5G, I think you do that at your own peril. If you're a policymaker, if you're a startup, if you're an incumbent. In terms of, this industry, I think and I look to others to either agree or disagree. I think on the back end, a lot of fintech is built still on old back-end banking. And what hasn't really been addressed is real-time processing, right? Getting rid of the infrastructure of banking, and that's non-trivial because there are a lot of agreements between correspondent banks. There's a lot of sort of BD and game theory that's involved there. But from a technology standpoint, getting to a place where the drumbeat of paying fees to move money in a day instead of 3 days and paying more, that drumbeat to say, I call BS on this, I know the technological capability is present, just move my money instantly, I think that will only increase. And then on the front end, there'll be interesting applications on the vein of video that continue to kind of push us in directions of greater and greater data-intensive applications like augmented reality. So if you're thinking about payments, imagine going down the street with your mobile phone and in real time streaming data with virtual coupons and promotions in all the stores around you, right? And being able to take advantage of that. That doesn't sound as much like science fiction in a world where 5G becomes deployed and is prevalent, which will take a while.
So I think Anthony raised an important point on regulation. One of the most important areas for regulation is actually data flows, because the whole digital applications, fintech is fundamentally based on data. We find a trend where countries are localizing data. They are setting up barriers to cross-border data flows. So I would like to ask Peng what she thinks of data localization and whether countries should be actually doing something different rather than localize their data.
Thank you for the questions. Today it's very difficult to be a regulator because as a government, you want to promote innovation, but at the same time, I think a lot of the time, since you're talking about data, many governments impose a data localization, while some of them may be looking at protecting the data, but I believe it's more about setting a trade barrier because you don't want the activities to move to another country who can be more efficient. Because that's why, especially in the West, we see that there are Germany, for instance, in EU, they're having this GDPR and all this restriction. While you can say that they're trying to protect the integrity of the data, of the personal data, but I think most of the time it's because if they allow the data to be moved out of their country, they are going to lose the investment, they're going to lose a job. My view, personally, I think that governments should look at other ways to protect the personal data and not restricting the data to be placed at another location. Otherwise, you cannot encourage collaboration, you cannot encourage innovation, you cannot encourage effectiveness of data flow. in a very highly hyper-connected world, you want to make sure the cross-border is facilitated but not restricted. Otherwise, what is the point of having all this 5G? What is the point of having this big data analytics when you are saying that, excuse me, you can do anything as long as it's in my country? I don't think that will work. So government's role is about working together with the industry, finding a ways to provide benefit and solution to serve the public and at the same time protect the public goods, but not in restricting innovation. That's how I would see the government should move forward. So I know there are a lot of FTA and multilateral G2G discussion. A lot of time is like, you can do anything you like, but I need to protect my own interests. I don't think it's a very progressive way for any government to move forward.
Yes,
So can I just build on? I think that was fascinating perspective, including some personal perspectives which may not be the government perspectives. See, the localization is the single most worrisome element which is actually taking things a couple of steps backwards. Even if it isn't the way we look at FinTech today, but the way, say, the MasterCard and the Visa systems work, there is a global data that is a flow, and the localization really stops that data from flowing out. Now, I think what the words that she used in describing that I have to protect myself, I think that onion needs to be peeled a little to say what is it that you're trying to protect, and then use FinTech to be able to meet those goals. Today, in my experience, where I've interacted with a few governments who are working on some of these policies which are impacting the startups and reading policies across countries of what it is, why they are doing it is not clear, but what they have done is very clear, and that is what you have to do. I think somewhere that why has to be understood, and solutions have to be found that allow the data flow to happen just like what you're anticipating and just like it used to. Otherwise, it is a death knell for some of the things and the possibilities that exist. But will it happen overnight? No. I think as a community, we need to work with the governments to be able to do this.
Yes, and also one of the things is, you know, just last week, China also released that in the People's of Bank of China, they have their own blockchain platform, and that is developed by the government. And actually, what I think they're internally, we mentioned that they developed this. They only want to make an open platform for welcome all the new startup or the different countries come to China to have a transparent and open platform. And also, why they do this actually is we don't want to, okay, we need to follow the rules and control the data, but at the same time, we need to take care about internally a lot of financial requirement or a lot of innovation that for the government also have the responsibility to make it is a transparent. So it's, the game is fair to everybody. And how you use the data, or of course at the same time, for different country, they will also need to have a different legal rules to apply to protect all their personal data or between the commercial sensitive information, these kind of things. But the most important is not just because the government want to control the data and then destroy some opportunities for the innovation. Because frankly speaking, if your country using this way to handle just the same as what Malaysia thinking, then I can go to other countries. I don't need to stay in your country. And or I can find a other country with a much more open to work out. So that's why I think most of the countries, especially the government, they also know how to make the balance between that.
Let me throw a slightly different point of view here. See, what I find is that data is really power. From the country's point of view also, this is a way of ensuring that your data stays with you because you can control and push other people from not getting into it. So, if you look at payments in India, for example, there's a good question. Should Indians be paying MasterCard and Visa for doing what they do? And who should be benefiting from it? And why shouldn't it be local? And shouldn't the local country companies or various things like you see with UPI and other benefits that are coming in? So there is definitely a government by government sort of belief that they need to control the data and the activities that happen within the country to the extent that it can be done. And we have seen examples of countries leveraging their power of data on other countries for all kinds of silly negotiations that you don't always hear about. So countries, especially those who can, want to make sure that they create barriers for different kinds of things, and these are all bargaining chips in various ways. So it's a fairly complicated problem. It's not just about trade and being nice and open to everyone else, but countries want to protect and be in this power game, and this is a big place where the fights are going to happen, and it's not going to be about the missiles you have, but the data you have.
Can I say something? I think when we talk about data localization, a lot of it is about where the data can be stored. That's number one. That's why the debate today is about, can I have my data in another server that is in another country? We are not talking about sharing data. We're not talking about exposing my data to your country. I'm talking about allowing me to put my data at a place that of my choice. And the discussion about data sharing is a different level of discussion. Obviously, that's why I was saying that we need to have certain process to protect data. But data localization in this case is about, you have to build either on-premise or you need to build a data center in my country, otherwise I cannot do business. So I think that's counterproductive in that sense. And then from that onwards, data sharing should be allowed if you have certain way of managing the safety, the security of the data. So that's where I am coming from. I agree with you that we shouldn't allow a big power to exploit the data that they have no power to exploit. They shouldn't be. That's a different discussion.
Very interesting. So I was recently reading a book by Kai-Fu Lee on AI superpowers. So what the basic premise of that book was that China will have an advantage over other countries by view of the fact that it has access to huge volumes of data, and the government is a very active player on AI. So smaller countries, maybe Malaysia, Vietnam, the smaller countries who do not have access to such large data sets may find it difficult to compete on AI. And if you look at FinTech, AI is going to be very integral to the future of FinTech.
It's not. I don't think it's restricted to smaller countries. Even large countries that have data privacy laws effectively segregate their data. So they might have a big data pool, but they're not allowed to share amongst that pool. It's the same as turning them into small countries. So you may as well look at the US and look at it as 50 small countries. So even though they're a big country and they've got a lot of data in aggregate, it's individually separated and not using it as effectively as you would in China because of the different political models that they have in China that allows them to use that data and leverage it. And we all know that AI and machine learning gets better the larger the data set there is. And that's a function of what it is. So in a way, we sort of, even when you do have it, you restrict yourself through these rules or regulations, etc. And I'm not debating that these rules and regulations need to exist. All I'm saying is that they do, and they are, by their own nature, inhibitive to some of this technological progress. That's just the reality. I mean, I want you to think about, let me take you back to a tool that you have in your hand today. Your mobile phone, it's working on circa 1990 technology when you're roaming. If you've traveled here, you're working on an old agreement that was established in 1988 or 1989, where when you check your mobile traffic, it's going all the way back to your home location and then tromboning coming all the way back. Why? It's because that's how it was established in the past. We're protecting that revenue stream, as Shailesh had sort of mentioned before, and it's good for the company who's setting that up. There's way more efficient ways to do that today, but we choose not to update some of those rules and those regulations. And then you take a look at the OTT players. Google and Google, Microsoft, you name all the FANG stocks, they spend every day of their life avoiding becoming a telco. They could be a telecommunications operator tomorrow. They choose to avoid it because it forces regulation upon them, which stifles their innovation, right? So this is the stuff that takes place. So regulations play a role in a lot of the technology that we're trying to deploy and we want to deploy. Humanity has this wonderful ability of working out of getting from point A to point B. Point B is a vision, a direction where you want to go. We've known to cure many diseases because we knew what the outcome was and we put all our resources to dealing with the outcome. What we're not intellectually honest about is point A. You can't build a bridge to point B if your A point is not anchored to the other side. So if you're intellectually honest about what your starting point is, you can get there. Most of the time, all the countries aren't working on a fair and common starting point to say, you know what, we want the FinTech or the banking industry to become better, more ethical, and all those other things, because they're protecting something. And that point A is not common amongst each of those countries. And that's where I think regulations come into play.
And I would say to answer the question, so Kai-Fu is a former colleague, a very smart man, and a great marketer. But I would say to objectively address that comment, you have to compare economies of scale to diseconomies of scale, right? Singapore, where we are, is a wonderful example in the global landscape of the power of diseconomies of scale, because you can move fast, you can be integrated, you can execute. I think looking at China, it's less about the size of the country, and it's more about the pace of execution. And they kind of buck the trend of being so large but still being able to move so fast. I give them more credit for execution than just sheer size. So I don't know that it's a question of large country, small country. I think it's more, as is always the case, who can execute against a compelling vision that delivers real value and can overcome that last mile problem of application.
Or removes the barrier.
So
Yeah,
I just think that, as I look at the crystal ball, I think that the creator of the algorithm and the user of the algorithm, there is going to be a new world order that will come into being. The creator, there will be a sandbox and all the brilliant minds will create that. Today, our paradigm is they create a company around it, the company gets valued and they make a lot of money because they have whatever data they have. And if we take the government regulator, and the point that was made that to say, it may be in country, but it's sitting in separate buckets. The government may have the ownership of all that data and may run an algorithm that is made by somebody else to come up with the solution. So what I'm saying is that there are newer business models that will come into being. It's not the only solution is not to break the walls, what the regulators are bringing in, but perhaps to empower them with the capabilities to be able to get the same end results for their countrymen, which is created by somebody else, but they are the executors. Right. And I think some of the sandbox methodologies that have been created by a few governments, the Indian government is among them. Those are the first few baby steps, and we'll see which way they evolve.
Very good. So we are slowly coming towards the end of this session. So I would like to, I see that there's just one question which is online. But let me open up this to the floor. Are there any questions from the floor? Anybody who has a question or would like to share some comment? Yes, Neelam.
As I look at the future, I believe that given the devices, given the 5G, given the technologies, we will see far more people using the tech platforms we create. whether it's FinTech, whether it's health tech, whether it's for education, it doesn't matter. But then, what is it we need to think about if it was a startup to say, this technology will scale? How do you look at scale? How do you predict scale? Because when we start, we are seeing very few takers, and sometimes that fools us to say the technology is efficient, it'll work the way we want it to go. But as the adoption picks up, I see that the scale question comes in. So how do you view the impact of scale on the technology we should use?
I think the consumer is king, and the consumer will decide what scales up and what does not, if it makes sense for the consumer. I mean, again, I'll use the WhatsApp example. Nobody held the gun to our head to say, download WhatsApp and use it. It makes sense. It is a utility. We all find value in it. And therefore, and the education point, I think Shailesh raised that education point, which is a big gap today. If we are able to cover the education part to educate the consumer on what's in it for him or her, there is a potential of that adoption. Otherwise, we'll be sitting in boardrooms and saying, these idiots don't adopt it. It makes a lot of sense for them. And that ain't going to cut it, because in real life, it is the consumer that's going to pay the bills.
Neelam, I'm going to answer your question from an operational perspective, because it triggered an operational question for me. To me, from a technology point of view, I think when it comes to scale, you just have to assume the product's going to break. It's not that you're going to prevent it from breaking at scale. It's how you recover and how quickly you do it. Do you have the processes in place to recover, or are you going to spend all your time denying that there's a problem at all, and it was a fat finger problem from the user, or it was the operator who broke it, or it was one of your suppliers? How do you deal with it? How do you tackle it, and how do you get on the horse, solve the problem, get to that B point, which is the outcome, as quickly as possible? Most of the time, it's psychology that takes place. People are trying to say, it wasn't me, it wasn't my piece of code, it wasn't my app, it wasn't the server that I bought, it was the data center. Get on there, solve the problem, and scale through learning. I'm pretty sure YouTube broke down a couple of times. I'm pretty sure, I'm very sure that happens. You just have to accept it and prepare for when that occurs. Right?
Just add, there's front-end scale and back-end scale. I think the back-end scale, this is maybe a simple, crude statement, largely solved. With AWS, with Google Cloud, with Microsoft, you can scale quite nicely. And to your point, I think most people are bracing themselves for technically what you have to do as you scale up your own infrastructure. Front-end scale, to me, is where people will really succeed. As you scale across geographies, as you scale down across economic classes, as you scale across languages, do you know how to manage that? The world is not monolithic. You don't succeed in one country and then just assume with no change, it'll just work. When we expanded Twitter to the Middle East, Arabic is right to left. When you have to have back-end infrastructure to support Japan, there's a level of precision in the way you serve a page. It has to be just as good as the West. It can't suffer just simply because it's far away. So whether it's language, whether it's taste, whether it's the user interface, to me, front-end scale, if you want to call it that, design, marketing, those are the things I think will matter more than I think when we classically think of scale on the back end.
I would just like to also give the opportunity to people who asked a question online. So the one which has the maximum number of words is again related to data, but the question is that how do you ensure that people outside of big data monopolies get access to data in the private sector? Any thoughts on that? Yes, Wanpen, let's start with you.
There are a lot of data out there you can already...
I just told her she'll take care of that. So.
have access to. Okay, there are different ways of looking at it. If you're talking about public data or a government-owned data, I don't think you have any option except to work with the government, with the regulators, with the policymakers to have a very good data sharing policy, which is something that we are working on hard on it, and that's the first step. And then everybody, even though you want to have access to data, you want to ensure that it's not being abused. So when you have that kind of policy, you also have to put some safeguard so that it can be used for certain purpose but not for other purpose, meaning it should be for good but not for bad. There is no rocket science. It's actually about government, industry, community coming together, agree that this is the way we want to move forward with our data, and let's agree that this is how we are going to use it responsibly. So that is the only way. Of course, today there are a lot of people are having a data, we call it exchange platform, where you can trade data. For that to happen, I will still go back to, you need to make sure that data is not being abused. And then if let's say I want to allow my data to be used, maybe we can start by not revealing the person's sensitive data, because there are a lot of data you don't need to know whether it belongs to Peng or it belongs to Randeep. It's just aggregate data that I can use it to come up with a lot of useful application. No rocket science. It's just like responsible use of data is the key.
Yes, Sudhir.
I guess finally it boils down to whose data it is, right? So everybody's trying to claim where it has to be stored out. It's the consumer's data, it is our data, it is citizens' data, right? So I guess one of the things that is eventually happening starting from customer experience, engagement, emotions, and now the world is slowly moving towards so-called the consent economy. So consent economy means if it's my data, then I should have some sort of say in how I will give consent, to whom I give, and in what basis. And the reason why I'm saying this is that defines if there is a benefit for me in terms of the value or in terms of products, then I might be happy to share, and so on and so forth. So the whole things that started from GDPR and now it is eventually moving into much bigger problem of how to develop this consent economy, and how do you differentiate between an offer which is made to me, which is not of organization's own P&L interest, and it is in my interest, and what kind of transparency that I can get from government and from organization. So these are the things that I think eventually we need to work through.
Of course, there are some countries like South Korea, which came out with a mid to long term master plan for an intelligent society. And in that plan, I saw that what they were proposing is a service called 114, which is a single point of contact for any data, both private and public. And they were also proposing doing data maps on the private data as well, in addition to public data, so that you help facilitate data markets and you help facilitate data flows. But with that, we have run out of time. And I would like to thank the panelists.
Thank you.
For an excellent session where a lot of new ideas and a lot of very interesting perspectives were shared. So let us give a hand to the panel.